my main grains are wheat and canola, and I have been just rotating those the infinitum, and I've actually got a very small pasture area where I've been grazing the stock on over the winter. I've probably got too much cropping area as a proportion of my pasture area, and I have been running my nitrogen levels down to some degree. The aim is to have a loosened clover-based pasture, fixed nitrogen. But these wet summers have done terrible things to our pastures, and they're primarily fleabane. Removing it from in pasture is proving to be a bit of a challenge. I'm trying to run I hate the term, but integrated weed management program. Over the past 10 years, particularly with the dry years, we've become very reliant on our herbicides. So the resistance, which during the 90s we kept fairly well under control, but since then, all around the edges of my paddocks, I'm starting to see ryegrass creeping in. To try and combat the issues, that we've sort of taken a multi-pronged approach. So we're trying to burn wherever possible. I've decided that for a few paddocks that we will actually use conventional tillage, hence the offset disc. Decided to step away a bit from the fire break spraying with chemicals and go back to mechanical type means. I certainly use the Merino wethers. They control bulk, but they don't actually kill the plants and stop them seeding. It's a two-edged sword. You've got to be really careful that you're not actually working against the chemicals themselves by decreasing your target. So they're fantastic to come in after a spray's been carried out, and then eating off the sweetened weeds. So currently there's 3 people employed. There's myself and Ray, and we're here sort of full-time, essentially working on cropping and infrastructure. And then I have a stockman. He comes in as a contractor and he moves my stock around. I love stock, but not as much as him. It's been fantastic because it's really freed me up so I can devote more time to the cropping and the infrastructure and the business side of it. The cropping has been sort of taking, over the dry years, actually taken a larger and larger share of the business. Not of the profits, but probably the work, and the sheep numbers have been run down. We're trying to actually increase our weather numbers a bit, just to keep the diversity up of the business. You've got to have some kind of got to have some stock. You've got to have something to fund your cropping hobby. So I don't have a grand plan for where we'll be in 5 years' time. I guess it's more about refinement. I was going to say something like we're flexible, but that's not actually my experience. Flexibility, chasing rainbows, hasn't been very successful as I've watched it over the fence. And so really we just try and stick to what we do best, keep it as simple as possible. I don't have a lot of labour units for the size of the place. It's all about efficiency and keeping everything streamlined. So we start sowing on the 20th of April, regardless of the weather conditions, and we don't stop until it's finished. We just poke along, primarily daylight hours. We sit down and we have a complete business plan for the whole 12 months. Claire and I have a discussion about it, and then I do what I'm told. That plan is then adapted as we go along to meet conditions and changing circumstance. During the really busy time, Claire maintains that kind of fiscal discipline that we think's essential for the business. A hobby of mine, which is the recording of yield data and application data, and then sort of processing it. As part of that, I have a sort of on-farm research process going on where I vary inputs and then monitor their effect on yield. I like to be able to say at the end of the year, I should have done this or I should have done that, and produce some empirical evidence. Just looking around at other operations, the difference between, success and failure has really been that ability to keep control of costs. You can adopt all kinds of different research and you can spend a lot of money on inputs, but cost control still seems to be the key. What are you signifying, Claire? Rain?
Well, that's right. You can spend all the money, but you don't get the money.
Oh, you're agreeing with me, that's good. And I mean, that is part of the research that I do. It's understanding what inputs are needed and trying to tailor them to our sort of long-term yield. The trouble with identifying constraints is I never see them coming. The constraint is always on me, sort of after the fact. It's things like a plague of locusts that come in and eat all your crops, and then what happened the next year? Mouse plague. But do I lose sleep over it? No, not really. If I had a bugbear or a concern, that it would be the level of research that goes on in agriculture today. There seems to be very little ongoing research, and it seems to be very focused. One of the good things about government research, it was a sort of a scattergun approach, that you had lots of people in their ivory towers doing different areas, looking at constraints that might never happen in their lifetime. But it really is about researchers and who's controlling that research effort and what the focus is. That really is a constraint.
If you try and control your costs through the season, the pressure on you to recoup that at harvest isn't as great. Like when these unforeseen circumstances happen, sure, you might not make the biggest harvest in the world, but the potential downside isn't as great either.
And try and keep the constraint in context. That's where the outside help from the consultant also comes in very useful. That outside advice, somebody who's not sort of in the thick of it.
He says, how can this make you money? Why are you spending this? What's the cost-benefit analysis sort of thing, which is a very, rational way of deciding on whether to do something or not.
It's good to have somebody who's not emotionally involved. Look, every farmer has guidance units in their machines and they're fantastic. I've got all the bells and whistles in the tractors. They're functional, sure, but do I get into my tractor and say, wow, this tractor can drive itself in a straight line now? Absolutely not. But when I look at a yield map and I can see that variation, well, that absolutely does it for me. That lights up a part in my brain that I reserve for other functions usually, but never gives you confidence, but it gives you a starting point. For me, it's asked lots of questions, and maybe that's the problem, and the reason I'm always on about research is because it's asked all these questions, but there's no researchers to go about answering them.